Three, two, one. Welcome once again to Storytime with Kurt, where we're reading right now Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. Previously, on Tom Swift and His Motorcycle, Tom had just seen a motorcycle go off the road into a ditch and was racing towards the ditch to make sure nobody was hurt. And we start with Chapter 4. Tom and a Motorcycle. When Tom reached the prostrate figure on the grass at the foot of the old oak tree, the youth bent quickly over the man. There was an ugly cut on his head, and blood was flowing from it. But Tom quickly noticed that the stranger was breathing, though not very strongly. "Well, he's not dead just yet," exclaimed the youth with a sigh of relief. "But I guess he's pretty badly hurt. I must get help. No, I'll take him into our house. It's not far. I'll call Dad." Leaning his wheel against the tree, Tom started for his home about 300 feet away, and then he noticed that the stranger's motorcycle was running at full speed on the ground. "Guess I better shut off the power," he exclaimed. "No use letting the machine be ruined." Tom had a natural love for machinery, and it hurt him almost as much to see a piece of fine apparatus abused as it did to see an animal mistreated. It was the work of a moment to shut off the gasoline and spark, and then the youth raced on towards his house. "Where's Dad?" he called to Mrs. Baggert, who was washing the dishes. "Out in one of the shops," replied the housekeeper. "Why, Tom, whatever has happened?" she went on hurriedly as she saw how excited he was. "Man hurt. Out in front. Motorcycle smash. I'm going to bring him in here. Get things ready. I'll find Dad." "Bless and save us," cried Mrs. Baggert. "Whatever we coming to? Who's hurt? How did it happen? Is he dead?" "Haven't time to talk now," answered Tom, rushing from the house. "Dad and I will bring him in here." Tom found his father in one of 3 small machine shops on the grounds of the Swift home. The youth hurriedly told what had happened. "Of course we'll bring him right in here," assented Mr. Swift, putting aside the work upon which he was engaged. "Did you tell Mrs. Baggert?" "Yes, and she's all excited." "Well, she can't help it, being a woman, I suppose, but we'll manage. Do you know the man? Now, as an aside here, you can tell the verbiage is dated, right? She can't help it being a woman, I suppose. Right now, you say those words and you start talking like that, in today's culture, you're going to get your teeth kicked in. So, but it's a product of its time. So, do you know the man?" "Never saw him before today when he tried to run me down. Guess he doesn't know much about motorcycles. But come on, Dad. He may bleed to death." Father and son hurried to where the stranger lay. As they bent over him, he opened his eyes and asked faintly, "Where am I? What happened?" "You're all right. In good hands," said Mr. Swift. "Are you much hurt?" Not much. Mostly stunned, I guess. What happened?" he repeated. "You and your motorcycle tried to climb a tree," remarked Tom with grim humor. "Oh, yes, I remember now. I couldn't seem to steer out of the way, and I couldn't shut off the power in time. Is the motorcycle much damaged?" "The front wheel is," reported Tom after an inspection, "and there are some other brakes, but I guess—" "I wish it were all smashed," exclaimed the man vigorously. "I never want to see it again." "Why? Don't you like it?" asked Tom eagerly. "No, and I never will." The man spoke faintly but determinedly. "Never mind now, son," interposed Mr. Swift. "Don't excite yourself. My son and I will take you to our house and send for a doctor." "I'll bring the motorcycle after we carried you in," added Tom. "Don't worry about the machine. I never want to see it again," went on the man, rising to a sitting position. "It nearly killed me twice today. I'll never ride again." "You'll feel differently after the doctor fixes you up," said Mr. Swift with a smile. "Doctor, I don't need a doctor, cried the stranger. I'm only bruised and shaken up. You have a bad cut on your head, said Tom. It isn't very deep, went on the injured man, placing his fingers on it. Fortunately, I struck the tree a glancing blow. If you'll allow me to rest in your house a little while and give me some plaster for the cut, I should be all right again. Plaster for the cut. If that isn't a little indicator of age, nothing is. I'm not putting any plaster on any cut I've got. Can you walk, or shall we carry you? Asked Tom's father. Oh, I can walk if you'll support me a little. And the stranger proved that he could do this by getting to his feet and taking a few steps. Mr. Swift and his son took hold of his arms and led him to the house. There he was placed on a lounge and given some simple restoratives by Mrs. Baggert, who, when she found the accident was not serious, recovered her composure. I must have been unconscious for a few minutes, went on the man. You were, explained Tom. When I got up to you, I thought you were dead until I saw you breathe. Then I shut off the power of your machine and ran in for Dad. I've got the motorcycle outside. You can't ride it for some time, I'm afraid, Mr. And Tom stopped in some confusion, for he realized that he didn't know the man's name. I beg your pardon for not introducing myself before, went on the stranger. I'm Wakefield Damon of Waterfield. But don't worry about me riding that machine again. I never shall. Oh, perhaps, began Mr. Swift. No, I never shall, went on Mr. Damon positively. My doctor told me to get it, as he thought riding around the country would benefit my health. I shall tell him his prescription nearly killed me. And me too, added Tom with a laugh. Why, are you the young man I nearly ran down this morning? Asked Mr. Damon, suddenly sitting up and looking at the youth. I am, answered our hero. Bless my soul, so you are, cried Mr. Damon. I was wondering who it could be. It's quite a coincidence, but I was in such a cloud of dust I couldn't make out who it was. You had your muffler open, and that made considerable dust, explained Tom. Was that it? Bless my existence. I thought something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what. I went all over the instructions in the book, and those the agent told me, but I couldn't think of the right one. I tried all sorts of things to make less dust, but I couldn't. Then bless my eyelashes if the machine didn't just stop after I nearly ran into you. I tinkered over it for about an hour or more before I could get it going again. Then I ran into the tree. My doctor told me the machine would do my liver good, but bless my happiness, I'd just as soon be without a liver entirely as to do what I've done today. I am done with motorcycling. A hopeful look came over Tom's face, but he said nothing, that is, not just then. In a little while, Mr. Damon felt so much better that he would start for home. I'm afraid you have to leave your machine here, said Tom. You can send for it any time you want to, added Mr. Swift. Bless my hatband, exclaimed Mr. Damon, who appeared to be very fond of blessing his various organs and his articles of wearing apparel. Bless my hatband, I never want to see it again. If you will be so kind as to keep it for me, I will send a junk man after it. I will never spend anything on having it repaired. I am done with that form of exercise, liver or no liver, doctor or no doctor. He appeared very determined. Tom quickly made up his mind. Mr. Damon had gone to the bathroom to get rid of some of the mud on his hands and face. Father, said Tom earnestly, may I buy that machine off him? What, buy a broken motorcycle? I can easily fix it. It's a fine make and in good condition. I can repair it. I've wanted a motorcycle for some time, and here's a chance to get a good one cheap. You don't need to do that, replied Mr. Swift. You have enough money to buy a new one if you want it. I never knew you cared for 'em. I didn't until lately, but I'd rather buy this one and fix it up than get a new one. Besides, I have a new idea for a kind of transmission, and perhaps I can work it out on this machine. Oh, well, if you want it for experimental purposes, I suppose it will be as good as any. Go ahead, get it if you wish, but don't give too much for it. I'll not. I fancy I can get it cheap. It's more of that old-timey language again. I fancy I can get it cheap. I wonder what these stories would be like just rewriting them in today's vernacular. I don't know. Just something to think about. Mr. Damon returned to the living room where he had been first carried. I cannot thank you enough for what you've done for me, he said. I might have lain there for hours. Bless my very existence. I've had a very narrow escape. Hereafter, when I see anyone on a motorcycle, I shall turn my head away. The memory will be too painful. And he touched the plaster that covered a cut on his head. Mr. Damon, said Tom quickly, will you sell me that motorcycle? Bless my finger rings. Sell you that mass of junk? It isn't all junk, went on the young inventor. I can easily fix it, though, of course, he added prudently. It will cost something. How much would you want for it? Well, replied Mr. Damon, I paid $250 last week. I've ridden 100 miles on it. That's the rate of $2.50 a mile. Pretty expensive riding. But if you're in earnest, I will let you have the machine for $50. And then I fear that I will be taking advantage of you. I'll give you $50, said Tom quickly, and Mr. Damon exclaimed, Bless my liver, that is, if I have one. Do you mean it? Tom nodded. I'll fetch you the money right away, he said, starting for his room. He got the cash from a small safe he had arranged, which was fitted up with an ingenious burglar alarm, and was on his way downstairs when he heard his father call out, Here, what do you want? Go away from that shop. Oh, yeah. No one is allowed there. And looking from an upper window, Tom saw his father running towards a stranger, who was just stepping inside the shop where Mr. Swift was constructing his turbine motor. Tom started as he saw that stranger was the same black mustached man whom he had noticed in the post office and later in the restaurant at Mansburg. And thus endeth chapter 4. Okay, we're going to pause for a minute so I can address the chat room and see how you guys are doing tonight. What's going on? Good to see you, Skippy, and folks from the Duome home. How's everybody? One of the things I want to do, and I'm going to switch views here. One of the things we need to do is that that sound did one of you guys trigger that sound clip, that widget? And or did you hear it? Because I don't know what's going on there. But I need to get rid of that, because I can't be having those sound effects going off while I'm reading. Bloodluster, Commander Root, Skippy KGT, good to hear you. And evening from the Duome home, if you guys are still there. Alright, let me see. I want to see if I can get rid of that widget altogether, because that is not cool. Let's see. And thank you for the follow, Duome family. Extensions. My extensions. Okay. Alright, so I don't see it here. Which makes me think that it is in my OBS. So I need to get rid of that. Okay, let's see. Don't see it there. That is kind of annoying. Okay. Let me ask you this, guys. Can you guys hear the crackling fireplace? And I'm sorry. I'm going to ask that again. No, but you're pretty much deaf. Well, here's the thing. I'm not sure that it's coming across. That's why I'm asking. So, let me see. And if it isn't, then I need to know that. Let's see. All right. Cool. Alright, we're just going to go on then. And thank you for your patience on that. And I will move this back. So previously on Chapter 4 of Tom Swift and his motorcycle, Tom found the man that crashed the motorcycle, brought him into the house to get him healed up, and ended up buying the motorcycle from Mr. Damon. Welcome to Tom Swift and his motorcycle, Chapter 5. Mr. Swift is alarmed. Stuffing the money. Well, let's try that again. Welcome to Tom's. Wow. You guys in the live chat room have a whole lot to see. This is awesome. All right. Welcome to Tom Swift and his motorcycle. Chapter 5. Mr. Swift is alarmed. Stuffing the money which he intended to give to Mr. Damon in his pocket, Tom ran downstairs. As he passed through the living room, intending to see what the disturbance was about, and if necessary, aid his father, the owner of the broken motorcycle exclaimed, "What's the matter? What's happened? Bless my coattails, but is anything wrong?" "I don't know," answered Tom. "There's a stranger about the shop, and my father never allows that. I'll be back in a minute." "Take your time," advised the somewhat eccentric Mr. Damon. I find my legs are a bit weaker than I suspected, and I will be glad to rest a while longer. Bless my shoelaces, but don't hurry." Tom went into the rear yard, where the shops and a small cluster of buildings were located. He saw his father confronting the man with the black mustache, and Mr. Swift was saying, "What do you want? I allow no people to come in here unless I or my son invites them. Did you wish to see me?" "Are you Barton Swift?" asked the man. "Yes, that's my name." "The inventor of the Swift safety lamp and the turbine motor?" At the mention of the motor, Mr. Swift started. "I am the inventor of the safety lamp you mentioned," he said stiffly, "but I must decline to talk about the motor. May I ask where you obtained your information concerning it?" "Why, I'm not at liberty to tell," went on the man. "I called to see if we can negotiate with you for the sale of it. Parties whom I represent—" At that moment, Tom plucked his father by the sleeve. "Dad," whispered the youth, "I saw him in Mansburg. I think he's one of the several who've been inquiring in Mr. Merton's shop about you and your patents. I wouldn't have anything to do with him until I found out more about him." "Is that so?" asked Mr. Swift quickly. Then, turning to the stranger, he said, "My son tells me—" But Mr. Swift got no further, for at that moment the stranger caught sight of Tom, whom he had not noticed before. "Huh!" exclaimed the man. "I have forgotten something. An important engagement. Will be back directly. We will see you again, Mr. Swift. Excuse the trouble I've put you to. I'm in a great hurry." And before father or son could stop him, had they any desire to, the man turned and walked quickly from the yard. Mr. Swift stood staring at him, and so did Tom. Then the inventor asked, "Do you know that man?" "What about him, Tom? Why did he leave so hurriedly?" "I don't know his name," replied Tom, "but I'm suspicious regarding him, and I think he left because he suddenly recognized me." Thereupon he told his father of seeing the man in the post office and hearing the talk of the same individual and two companions in the restaurant. "So you think they're up to some mischief, Tom?" asked the parent when the son had finished. "Well, I wouldn't go quite as far as that, but I think that they're interested in your patents, and you ought to know whether you want them to be or not." "I most certainly do not, especially in the turbine motor. That is my latest invention, and I think will prove very valuable. But, though I've not mentioned it before, I expect to have trouble with it. Soon after I perfected it, with the exception of some minor details, I received word from a syndicate of rich men that I was infringing on a motor, the patent of which they controlled. Now this surprised me for two reasons. One, because I did not know that anyone knew I had invented the motor. I had kept the matter secret, and I'm at a loss to know how it leaked out. To prevent any further information concerning my plans becoming public, I sent you to Mansburg today. But it seems that the precaution was of little avail. Another matter of surprise was the information that I was infringing on the patent of someone else. I had a very careful examination made, and I found that the syndication of rich men was wrong. I was not infringing. In fact, though the motor they have is somewhat like mine, there is one big difference. Theirs does not work, while mine does. Their patents are worthless." "Then what do you think is their object?" "I think they want to get control of my invention of the turbine motor, Tom, and that's what's been worrying me lately. I know these men to be unscrupulous, and with plenty of money, they may make trouble for me." "But can't you fight them in the courts?" "Yes, I could do that. It's not as if I was a poor man, but I do not like lawsuits. I want to live quietly and invent things. I dislike litigation. Boy, isn't that refreshing, huh? However, if they force it on me, I'll fight, exclaimed Mr. Swift determinedly. So do you think this man was one of the crowd of financiers? Asked Tom. It would be hard to say. I did not like his actions, and the fact that he sneaked in here as if he was trying to get possession of some of my models or plans makes it suspicious. It certainly does, agreed Tom. Now, if we only knew his name, we could... He suddenly paused in his remark and sprang forward. He picked up an envelope that had dropped where the stranger had been standing. The man lost this from his pocket, Dad, said Tom eagerly. It's a telegram. Shall we look at it? I think we'll be justified in protecting ourselves. Is the envelope open? Yeah. Then read the telegram. Now, as an aside, I think this is a little ethically challenging, but clearly let's go with it. Tom drew out a folded yellow slip of paper. It was a short message, and he read, Anson Morse, Mansburg. See Swift today, period. Or I guess, no, this is like a telegram, so we have to say stop, right, in the whole thing, like the old-timey thing. So, Anson Morse, Mansburg, stop. See Swift today, stop. Make offer, stop. If not accepted, do the best you can, stop. Spare no effort, stop. Don't give plans away, stop. Is that all? Asked Mr. Swift. I'll accept the signature. So who is the telegram signed by? By Smeek and Catch, answered Tom. Those rascally lawyers, exclaimed his father. I was beginning to suspect this. That's the firm which represents the syndicate of wealthy men who are trying to get my turbine motor patents away from me. Tom, we must be on our guard. They will wage a fierce fight against me, for they have sunk many thousands of dollars in a worthless machine, and are desperate. We'll fight 'em, cried Tom. You and I, Dad. We'll show 'em that the firm of Swift & Son is swift by name and swift by nature. Good, exclaimed the inventor. I'm glad you feel that way about it, Tom. But we're gonna have no easy task. Those men are rich and unscrupulous. We shall have to be on our guard constantly. Now, let me have that telegram. It may come in useful. I must send word to Reed and Crawford, my attorneys in Washington, to be on the lookout. Matters are coming to a curious pass. As Mr. Swift and his son started for the house, they met Mr. Damon coming towards them. Bless my very existence, cried the eccentric man. I was beginning to fear something had happened to you. I'm glad that you're all right. I heard voices and I imagined... It's all right, Mr. Swift assured him. There was a stranger about my shop, and I never allow that. Do you feel well enough to go? If not, we'll be glad to have you remain with us. We've got plenty of room. Oh, thank you very much, but I must be going. I feel much better. Bless my gaiters, but I will never trust myself in an automobile again. I will renounce gasoline from now on. That reminds me, spoke Tom. I got the money for the motorcycle, and he drew out the bills. You sure you won't regret your bargain, Mr. Damon? The machine is new and needs only slight repairs. $50 is... Tut-tut, young man. I feel as if I was getting the best of you. Bless my handkerchief. I hope you've got no bad luck with it. I'll try and be careful, promised Tom with a smile as he handed over the money. I'm going to gear it differently and put some improvements on it. Then I'll use it instead of my bicycle. It would have to be very much improved before I trusted myself on it again, declared Mr. Damon. Well, I appreciate what you've done for me, and if at any time I can reciprocate the favor, I will only be too glad to do so. Bless my soul, though I hope I don't have to rescue you from trying to climb a tree. And with a laugh, which showed that he had fully recovered from his mishap, he shook hands with father and son and left. "A very nice man, Tom," commented Mr. Swift. "Somewhat odd and out of the ordinary, but a fine character for all that." "That's what I was going to say," added the son. "Now, Dad, you'll see me scooting around the country on a motorcycle. I've always wanted one, and now I have a bargain." "Do you think you can repair it?" "Of course, Dad. I've done more difficult things than that. I'm going to take it apart now and see what it needs." "Before you do that, Tom, I wish you would take a telegram to town for me. I must wire my lawyers at once." "Dad looks worried," thought Tom as he wheeled the broken motorcycle into a machine shop where he did most of his work. "Well, I don't blame him, but we'll get the best of those scoundrels yet." And that's the end of chapter 4. Chapter 5, I'm sorry. That's the end of chapter 5. So, we'll take a moment to chat with the chat room again. How is everyone doing tonight? Skippy, you hanging in there? Commander Root? Duome? How's everybody doing? Gonna get myself a little drink there. Oh, thanks, man. So, let me flip this back here. Oh, wrong flip. There we go. I'll flip this back over to here. So yeah, if you guys are enjoying this, pretty soon the videos will be published on YouTube. Just waiting for some final graphics to put up there. The one thing I'm going to ask everybody who is listening to this and is enjoying this is to spread the word. It's the only way we can build an audience and build this whole thing. So it's pretty cool, pretty good feedback so far from folks. But let's just see what we can do. Okay. So let's see. Let's go back. And we'll try to do a little bit of a recap here. All right. Previously in Chapter 5 of Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. Basically, they brought in the Mr. Damon and dealt with his crash and his injuries, and some shady characters showed up at the Swift house to try to procure the turbine engine that Mr. Swift is working on. The problem with that is that was supposed to be a secret. They shouldn't know about it. And so they're basically claiming that Mr. Swift has infringed on their patent. Well, Mr. Swift is going to have none of that. So, as people are wont to do, lawyers are going to get involved. Even though Mr. Swift doesn't like litigation, he has to get his lawyers involved to protect things. And now, we move on. Welcome to Chapter 6 of Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. Chapter 6 is titled, An Interview in the Dark. While Mr. Swift was writing the message he wished his son to take to the village, the young mechanic inspected the motorcycle he'd purchased. Tom found that a few repairs would suffice to put it in good shape, though an entire front wow, I completely botched that one. Let me start that sentence over again. Tom found that a few repairs would suffice to put it in good shape, though an entire new front wheel would be needed. The motor had not been damaged, as he ascertained by a test. Tom rode into town on his motorcycle. Wow. I am just... Well, have fun with these ones, kids. Tom rode into town on his bicycle, and as he hurried along, he noticed in the west a bank of ugly-looking clouds that indicated a shower. "I'm in for a wetting before I get back," he mused, and he increased his speed, reaching the telegraph office shortly before 7 o'clock. "I'm in for a wetting before I get back." Wetting. Boy, another just like old vernacular, right? It's like nobody's going to say, well, it's raining outside. I'm in for a wetting. No. Going to get wet? Sure. Okay. Think this storm will hold off until I get home? Asked Tom. I'm afraid not, answered the agent. You better get a hustle on. Tom sprinted off. It was getting dark rapidly, and when he was about a mile from home, he felt several warm drops on his face. Here it comes, exclaimed the youth. Now for a little more speed. Tom pressed harder on the pedals. Too hard, in fact, for an instant later something snapped, and the next he knew, he was flying over the handlebars of the bicycle. At the same time, there was a metallic clinking sound. Chain's busted, exclaimed the lad as he picked himself up out of the dust. Well, wouldn't that jar you? And he walked back to where, in the dusk, he could dimly discern his wheel. The chain had come off the two sprockets and was lying to one side. Tom picked it up and ascertained by close observation that the screw and nut holding the two joining links together was lost. Nice pickle, he murmured. How am I going to find it in all this dust and darkness? He asked himself disgustedly. I'll carry an extra screw next time. No, I won't either. I'll ride my motorcycle next time. Well, I may as well give it a look round. I hate to walk if I can fix it and ride. Tom had not spent more than 2 minutes looking about the dusty road with the aid of matches for the screw, when the rain suddenly began falling in a hard shower. Guess there's no use lingering here any longer, he remarked. I'll push the wheel and run for home. He started down the road in the storm and darkness. The highway soon became a long puddle of mud. Now remember, they have all dirt roads here. I've not heard anything about any pavement at all. This is 1910 we're talking about. The highway soon became a long puddle of mud, through which he splashed, finding it more and more difficult every minute to push the bicycle in the thick, sticky clay. Above the roar of the wind and the swishing of the rain, he heard another sound. It was a steady puff, puff, and then the darkness was cut by a glare of light. An automobile, said Tom aloud. Guess I'd better get out of the way. He turned to one side, but the auto, instead of passing him when it got to the place where he was, made a sudden stop. Want a ride? Asked the chauffeur, peering out from the side curtains, which somewhat protected him from the storm. Curtains instead of windows. Interesting. Tom saw that the car was a large touring one. Can I give you a lift? Went on the driver. Well, I've got my bicycle with me, explained the young inventor. My chain's broken, and I've got a mile to go. Jump up and back, invited the man. Leave your wheel here. It'll be safe. I couldn't do that, said Tom. I don't mind walking. I'm wet through now, and I can't get much wetter. I'm much obliged, though. Well, I'm sorry, but I can hardly take you and the bicycle, too, continued the chauffeur. Certainly not, added a voice from the tonneau of the car. But we can't have a muddy bicycle in here. Who is that person, Simpson? It's a young man, asked the driver. Is he acquainted around here? Went on the voice from the rear of the car. Ask him if he's acquainted around here, Simpson. Tom was wondering where he'd heard that voice before. He had a vague notion that it was familiar. Are you acquainted around here? Obediently asked the man at the wheel. I live here, replied Tom. Ask him if he knows anyone named Swift, continued the voice from the tonneau, and the driver started to repeat it. I heard him, interrupted Tom. Yes, I know him, Mr. Swift. But Tom, with a sudden resolve, and one he could hardly explain, decided that for the present he would not betray his own identity. Ask him if Mr. Swift is an inventor. Once more the unseen person spoke in the voice Tom was trying vainly to recall. Yes, he's an inventor, was the youth's answer. Do you know much about him? What are his habits? Does he live near his workshops? Does he keep many servants? Does he... The unseen questioner suddenly parted the side curtains and peered out at Tom, who stood in the muddy road close to the automobile. At that moment there came a bright flash of lightning, illuminating not only Tom's face, but that of his questioner as well. And at the sight, Tom started, no less than the man did, for Tom had recognized him as one of the three mysterious persons in the restaurant. And as for the man, he had also recognized Tom. Why, it's you, isn't it?" cried the questioner, and he thrust his head out further from the curtains. "My, what a storm!" he exclaimed as the rain increased. "So you know Mr. Swift, eh? I saw you today in Mansburg, I think. I have a good memory for faces. Do you work for Mr. Swift, or if you do, may be able to... I'm Tom Swift, son of Mr. Barton Swift," said Tom as quietly as he could. "Tom Swift? His son?" cried the man, and he seemed much agitated. "Why, I thought, that is, Morse said, Simpson, hurry back to Mansburg." And with that, taking no more notice of Tom, the man in the auto hastily drew the curtains together. The chauffeur threw in the gears and swung the ponderous machine to one side. The road was wide, and he made the turn skillfully. A moment later, the car was speeding back the way it had come, leaving Tom standing on the highway, alone in the mud and darkness, with the rain pouring down in torrents. And we come to the end of Chapter 6. And you know what? Given the time, I am going to do one more chapter for this. But first, let's check in with the chat room. All right. Skippy, how you doing, buddy? Good to see you guys hanging. I really do appreciate it. And I'm hoping there's other people hanging that we're just not seeing. Chill. Nice, buddy. Hope you had a good day at work today. Okay, we're just gonna continue on. I'll flip that back. Okay. So, previously on Chapter 6 of Tom Swift and His Motorcycle, basically, we got the motorcycle purchased. Tom was riding his bike, broke down, and was approached by a car. And the car had one of the mysterious men from Mansburg, who, once they recognized him and figured out who he was, freaked out and went back to Mansburg. And welcome back to Tom Swift and His Motorcycle. Chapter 7, Off on a Spin. Tom's first impulse was to run after the automobile, the red tail light of which glowed through the blackness like a ruby eye. Then he realized that it was going from him at such a swift pace that it would be impossible to get near it, even if his bicycle was in working order. "But if I had my motorcycle, I'd catch up to him," he murmured. "As it is, I must hurry home and tell Dad. This is another link in the queer chain that seems to be winding around us. I wonder who that man was, and what he wanted by asking so many personal questions about Dad." Trundling his wheel before him, with the chain dangling from the handlebar, Tom splashed on through the mud and rain. It was a lonesome, weary walk, tired as he was with the happenings of the day, and the young inventor breathed a sigh of thankfulness as the lights of his home shone out in the mist of the storm. As he tramped up the steps of the side porch, his wheel bumping along ahead of him, a door was thrown open. "Why, it's Tom!" exclaimed Mrs. Baggert. "Whatever happened to you?" and she hurried forward with a kindly solicitude. Wow, that's a word you don't hear much. She hurried forward with kindly solicitude, for the housekeeper was almost a second mother to the youth. "Chain broke," answered the lad laconically. "Where's Dad?" "Out in the shop, but working his latest invention, I expect. But are you hurt?" "Oh, no. I fell easily. The mud was like a feather bed, you know, except that it isn't so good for the clothes." And the young inventor looked down at his splashed and bedraggled garments. Mr. Swift was very much surprised when Tom told him of the happening on the road, and related the conversation and the subsequent alarm of the man on learning Tom's identity. "Who do you suppose he could have been, Dad?" asked Tom when he had finished. "I'm pretty certain he was one of the crowd of financiers who Anson Morse seemed to be a representative," said Mr. Swift. "Are you sure the man was one of those who saw you in the restaurant?" "Positive. I had a good look at him both times. Do you think he imagined he could come here and get possession of some of your secrets?" "I hardly know what to think, Tom, but we'll take every precaution. We'll set the burglar alarm wires, which I've neglected for some time, as I fancied everything would be secure here. Then I'll take my plans and the model of the turbine motor into the house. I'll run no chances tonight." Mr. Swift, who was adjusting some of the new bolts that Tom had brought home that day, began to gather up his tools and material. "I'll help you, Dad," said Tom, and he began connecting the burglar alarm wires, there being an elaborate system of them about the house, shops, and grounds. I often wonder, when we're talking a burglar alarm and wires, what does that mean? Is it like literally a bunch of wires that are strewn about that have like bells attached to them? Is there any like electricity aspect to it? I really wonder what this looks like. I want to believe that it's like bells on the ends of strings and things, and when people trip on them, you hear the alarm. Neither Tom nor his father slept well that night. Several times one or the other of them arose, thinking they heard unusual noises, but it was only some disturbance caused by the storm, and morning arrived without anything unusual having taken place. The rain still continued, and Tom, looking from his window and seeing the downpour, remarked, "I'm glad of it." "Why?" asked his father, who was in the next room. "Because I have a good excuse for staying in and working on my motorcycle." "But you must do some studying," declared Mr. Swift. "I will hear you in mathematics right after breakfast." "All right, Dad, I guess you'll find I have my lessons." Tom had graduated with honors from a local academy, and when it came to a question of going further in his studies, he'd elected to continue with his father for a tutor instead of going to college. Wow, that is unexpected. I would have expected the college aspect of this thing to be important, especially back then. But, wow, it's not much different than decisions that people make now, right? Now, Mr. Swift was a very learned man, and this arrangement was satisfactory to him as it allowed Tom more time at home so he could aid his father on the inventive work and also plan things for himself. Tom showed a taste for mechanics, and his father wisely decided that such training as his son needed could be given at home to better advantage than in a school or college. Lessons over, Tom hurried on to his own particular shop and began taking apart the damaged motorcycle. "First, I'll straighten the handlebars, and then I'll fix the motor and transmission," he decided. "The front wheel I can buy in town, as this one would hardly pay for repairing." Tom was soon busy with wrenches, hammers, pliers, screwdriver. He was in his element and was whistling over his task. The motor he found in good condition, but it wasn't such an easy task as he had hoped to change the transmission. He had finally to appeal to his father in order to get the right proportion between the back and front gears, for the motorcycle was operated by a sprocket chain instead of a belt drive, as is the case with some. Mr. Swift showed Tom how to figure out the number of teeth needed on each sprocket in order to get an increase of speed, And as there was a sprocket wheel from a disused piece of machinery available, Tom took that. He soon had it in place and then tried the motor. To his delight, the number of revolutions of the rear wheel were increased about 15%. "I guess I'll make some speed," he announced to his father. "But it will take more gasoline to run the motor. Don't forget that. You know the great principles of mechanics, that you can't get out of the machine any more than you can put into it, nor quite as much, as a matter of fact, for considerable is lost through friction." "Well then, I'll enlarge the gas tank," declared Tom. "I want to go fast where I'm going." He reassembled the machine, and after several hours of work, had it in shape to run, except that a front wheel was lacking. "I think I'll go to town and get another one," he remarked. "The rain isn't quite so hard now." In spite of his father's mild objections, Tom went, using his bicycle, the chain of which he had quickly repaired. He found just the front wheel needed, and that night his motorcycle was ready to run. But it was too dark to try it, especially as he had no good lantern, the one on the cycle having been smashed, and his own bicycle light not being powerful enough. So he had to postpone his trial trip until the next day. He was up early the following morning and went out for a spin before breakfast. He came back with flushed cheeks and bright eyes, just as Mr. Swift and Mrs. Baggert were sitting down to the table. "To Reedville and back," announced Tom proudly. "What, a round trip of 30 miles?" exclaimed Mr. Swift. "That's what," declared his son. "I went like a greased pig most of the way. I had to slow up going through Mansburg, but the rest of the time I let it out for all it was worth." "You must be careful," cautioned Tom's father. "You're not an expert yet." "No, I realize that. Several times when I wanted to slow up, I began to backpedal, forgetting that I wasn't on my bicycle. Then I thought to shut off the power and put on the brake. But it's glorious fun. I'm going out again as soon as I have something to eat. That is, unless you want me to help you, Dad." "No, not this morning. Learn to ride the motorcycle. It may come in handy." Neither Tom nor his father realized what an important part the machine was. What an important part the machine was soon to play in their lives. Tom went out for another spin after breakfast, and in a different direction. He wanted to see what the machine would do on a hill, and there was a long, steep one about 5 miles from home. The roads were in fine shape after the rain, and he speeded up the incline at a rapid rate. "It certainly does eat up the road," the lad murmured. "I have improved this machine considerably. Wish I could take out a patent on it." Reaching the crest of the slope, he started down the incline. He turned off part of the power and was gliding along joyously. Now, they've said this a few times, and yeah, I'm taking a little bit of an aside here. There must have been some common practice of like turning off the power of the motorcycle when you coast, I guess, because they've mentioned this a few times. In fact, that was part of the crash. The guy couldn't turn off the power while he was going. That seems a little odd to me. I wonder what the science is behind that. So back to our story. He turned off part of the power and was gliding along joyously when from a crossroad he suddenly saw, turn into the main highway, a mule drawing a ramshackle wagon loaded with fence posts. Beside the animal walked an old colored man. Okay, so this is another aside. I have heard that some of the language here was written of its time, and how the book refers to African Americans gets a little, well, not going to even say a little. It gets racist. The terms that they were used are clearly not acceptable now. I am going to read what is written. We can talk about it if you like, but as it stands, this is just the way it's written. So If it offends people, I'm sorry, but I think it's important for the story and for the time to just read it the way it's written. Back to the story. I hope he gets out of the way in time, thought Tom. He's moving slow as molasses, and I'm going a bit faster than I'd like. Guess I'll shut off and put on the brakes. The mule and the wagon were now squarely across the road. Tom was coming nearer and nearer. He turned the handle grip, controlling the supply of the gasoline, and to his horror, he found that it was stuck. He couldn't stop the motorcycle. "Look out! Look out!" cried Tom. "Get out of the way! I can't stop! Let me pass you!" The man looked up. He saw the approaching machine, and he seemed to lose possession of his senses. "Whoa, Boomerang!" cried the man. "Whoa! Something's going to happen." "That's what," muttered Tom desperately, and as he saw that there was not room for him to pass without going into the ditch, a proceeding that would mean an upset. "Pull out of the way!" he yelled again. But either the driver couldn't understand, or he didn't appreciate the necessity. The mule stopped and reared up. The man hurried to the head of the animal to quiet it. "Whoa, Boomerang! Just stand still," he said. Tom, with a great effort, managed to twist the grip and finally shut off the gasoline. But it was too late. He struck the man with the front wheel. Fortunately, the youth had managed to somewhat reduce his speed by a quick application of the brake, or the result might have been serious. As it was, the man was gently lifted away from the mule's head and tossed into the long grass into the ditch. Tom, by a great effort, succeeded in maintaining his seat in the saddle and then bringing the machine to a stop. He leaped off and turned back. The man was sitting up, looking dazed. "Whoa, Boomerang," he murmured. "Something's happened." But the mule, who had quieted down, only waggled his ears lazily, and Tom, ready to laugh, now that he saw he had not committed manslaughter, hurried to where the colored man was sitting. And that's the end of chapter 7. All right, so before we finish this, that whole thing I said about reading the original language, frankly, I'm not doing that. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm going to substitute words that make sense to the story but won't affect the story. Yeah, I'm not reading exactly what's written. I am going to read what's necessary. And if that offends people on the other side, I apologize. But it's better this way, from my perspective, and it's more appropriate to today. I just am not going to feel comfortable reading it. If I was reading this to my kids, I would absolutely be substituting these words. I said colored man twice. That'll be the last time I say that. I'm just going to refer to him as a man. So, if you don't like it, then please don't listen. I apologize. No, I don't apologize for that. No, I don't. If you don't like it, please don't listen. If you do, if you're okay with the way it's going, please continue to listen. That's all I care about. So, that is the end of chapter 7, and that's where we're going to end things tonight. So thank you so much for listening. I'm going to stop the recording here. Awesome. And going to address the chat room again. We'll flip back into book view. All right, so we got through 4 chapters tonight. I didn't think we were going to go that far, but good. That's great. Skippy, how you doing, bud? Yeah, it's funny because I didn't think it was going to be. Well, okay, so because I expect to not cut much of this video for the YouTube end of things, Skippy is saying he was glad I decided to do a bit of editing for content. I agree. Yeah, some of the old language really isn't that great, Skippy, and frankly, there's some language coming up that gets even worse, and so I'm not. It's not worth it. And again, the purpose of this whole podcast is to have the feel of me reading stories to my kids or my grandkids. And if I were reading this story to my kids or my grandkids, I would edit. I just would. So I'm hoping that people can not have that be an issue. I would think in today's day and age it won't be an issue. But yeah, we're just going to go from there. Now, the Tom Swift series has been criticized for that kind of language, particularly earlier, and I understand the criticism. But I think the core stories are still good, and so we're going to just continue with that. And like I said, I'm just going to self-edit. So if you have suggestions, if you have any comments, please go ahead and fill out that suggestion box below. And we'll go from there. But I think that'll do it for tonight. Thank you so much, Skippy, for being a great supporter of the channel and of the stuff that I'm doing. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll go from there. Have a great evening. We'll see you later.